Stop calling it patience. Stop calling it kindness. What you've been practicing isn't virtue, it's exposure. It's the silent habit of begging through behavior. And begging doesn't erode your power slowly. It strips you of it instantly. The moment your need leaks into your actions, leverage evaporates. The second desperation becomes visible. The balance collapses. 5 centuries ago, Machiavelli saw this with brutal clarity. Power doesn't disappear because you're evil. It disappears because you're readable. Most people still misunderstand power. They think it lives in force, volume, dominance, aggression. It doesn't. Power lives in uncertainty, in restraint, in the quiet control of what others cannot predict about you. The most dangerous position is not being hated. It's being understood too easily. And yet, that's exactly what you've been trained to become, transparent before the game even begins. You defend yourself when no attack exists. You explain decisions that require no justification. You reveal your internal world to people who haven't earned the right to see it. At some point, the roles inverted. You began seeking validation from people who should be qualifying for access to you. You treated your time as unlimited, your attention as cheap, your presence as guaranteed. But scarcity is what creates gravity. When something is always available, it loses weight. What you've been calling being nice is often surrender wrapped in politeness. And here's the brutal truth most people avoid. Every time you display need, you teach others that your standards bend. Every time you over-explain, you announce uncertainty in your own authority. Every time someone violates your terms and nothing happens, you confirm that access to you has no real cost. And once that lesson is learned, it's never unlearned. This isn't about becoming heartless. It's not about cutting people off for sport. It's about recognizing that emotional transparency, placed in the wrong hands, becomes a weapon turned against you. Familiarity without consequence always decays into contempt. Some people only respect what they're afraid to lose. Machiavelli's principles weren't written for tyrants. They were written for anyone who refuses to be controlled by their own generosity. If you've ever felt drained after giving everything, invisible after being loyal, or mentally exhausted by people who demand endlessly without contributing, you already understand why these rules exist. You don't need more empathy. You need structure. This isn't about shutting down. It's about discipline. Not cutting everyone off, but making access to you something that must be continually earned. Not talking less, but requiring more through silence. Because silence, when intentional, is not absence. It's pressure. Here's the shift most people never make. Begging isn't always verbal. Most of the time, it's operational. It's rearranging your life to accommodate someone who never adjusts theirs. It's accepting behavior from familiar people that you'd never tolerate from strangers. It's maintaining access for those who consume everything and contribute nothing. That's begging. And it destroys you not because people are cruel, but because human psychology is predictable. Human nature responds to scarcity, uncertainty, and cost. When you are endlessly accommodating, permanently available, constantly understanding, you become predictable. And predictability is the death of power. Machiavelli understood that the moment you need something from someone more than they need it from you, the dynamic inverts, not temporarily, but structurally. Need creates leverage. Leverage determines control. So ask yourself honestly, where is emotion overriding calculation in your life? Are you maintaining draining connections because you fear solitude? Tolerating boundary violations to avoid conflict? Dispensing time, energy, attention, and effort without requiring reciprocity. That isn't generosity. That's strategic exposure. You're revealing your vulnerabilities before the other person has revealed theirs. You're showing what you value before confirming they value you in return. And when you do that, you eliminate the fear of losing you. Once that fear disappears, respect follows it out the door. People do not value unlimited access. They do not protect what costs them nothing. They do not respect what they're certain will never leave. You think constant availability builds loyalty. In reality, it builds entitlement. Entitlement teaches people that your boundaries are negotiable, your time is inexhaustible, and your presence is guaranteed regardless of how they behave. Once that lesson is internalized, they stop qualifying for your attention. They stop investing effort. They stop considering the impact of their actions on you, because they know you'll remain accessible anyway. This is the difference that changes everything. Seeking versus positioning. Seeking asks for permission. Positioning creates a framework where others must earn the right to remain in your world. Seeking makes you reactive. Positioning makes you sovereign. Machiavelli warned that men deceive themselves through hope, the hope that giving more will eventually create appreciation. It won't. It creates expectation. And expectation without reciprocity is exploitation. The moment you recognize begging as strategic suicide, you gain the ability to end it. And when you end it, everything recalibrates. You stop pleading for respect and start structuring for it. You move from emotional exposure to controlled presence, from being consumed to being calculated. This is where power begins. Not in cruelty, but in containment. Not in aggression, but in discipline. Not in explaining who you are, but in making your access something others can lose. Now let's get ruthless about something most people keep romanticizing: familiarity. Familiarity is not intimacy. Familiarity is repetition. And repetition, without consequence, is how people learn they can treat you cheaply. Watch how a stranger approaches you versus how someone close approaches you. A stranger is careful, measured, polite. They don't know your tolerance threshold, so they default to respect. But the familiar person, they've studied your limits. They've tested you in small ways, then larger ways. And every time you let it slide, they filed the information away like a successful experiment. That's how entitlement is built. Not in a single betrayal, not in one big insult. Entitlement is assembled in tiny moments where you keep granting access after disrespect. You keep responding after inconsideration. You keep showing up after being taken for granted. And every time you do, you participate in your own devaluation. Here's the essence. Respect needs uncertainty to survive. When people know you'll always be there, they stop maintaining standards. When they feel safe disrespecting you, they stop fearing consequences. And when consequences disappear, your value becomes theoretical. So, what do? You cut familiar access before it turns into entitlement. And no, you don't do it with an emotional speech. You don't announce your new boundaries. You don't demand that people understand you. That's the old you, the version that still wants approval while trying to enforce standards. That version can't exist anymore. You change conditions through action. You stop being available the way you used to be. You stop responding with the same speed. You stop clearing obstacles for people who keep creating them. You stop being the one who always facilitates. You remove comfort without confrontation. Because confrontation is a negotiation invitation. The moment you confront, you give them a stage. They can explain. They can cry. They can promise. They can temporarily modify behavior until you relax again. Confrontation gives manipulators oxygen. Silence suffocates that oxygen. Silence creates a void, and voids create uncertainty. And uncertainty is what restores the thing you lost. Unpredictability. The moment your pattern breaks, people can no longer count on you. They don't know where they stand. They don't know if they crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. They don't know if you're still accessible. That uncertainty forces recalibration. Not your explanations, not your lectures, your absence. This is the metaphor. You are not a public park. You are a gated city. A park is open, free, and always available. So people litter, disrespect it, treat it casually. A city with gates and guards forces behavior. People approach carefully. They respect rules. They measure their tone. Because access feels earned. When you limit repeated access, you're not punishing anyone. You're reintroducing cost. You're saying, my presence isn't your default setting, it's your privilege. Here's what will happen, and you need to be ready for it. Some people will upgrade. They'll reflect. They'll become more respectful because they can feel the possibility of losing you. Those people were never evil. They were simply responding to the rules you taught them. Change the rules, and they change their behavior. But most won't upgrade. Most will get irritated, confused. They'll probe for explanations so they can reopen negotiation. They'll try to restore the old dynamic where they could behave however they wanted while you stayed accessible. Don't explain. Explanations are closure, and closure is a gift. If they didn't protect access, they don't deserve the comfort of understanding why access changed. Let them sit in uncertainty. Let them feel the consequences without a narrated story. If they truly value you, they'll correct themselves without needing a speech. If they don't, they'll accuse you of changing. Good. That's the point. Now there's a specific moment in every dynamic you must learn to detect, because missing it is how people become permanently exploited. It's the entitlement shift. At first they ask, you help, they thank you, they're grateful. Then they ask again and again. And somewhere inside that repetition, the thank you disappears. Gratitude evaporates. The request becomes expectation. The tone changes. The energy changes. The shift from can you to when can you is not a small detail. It's the entire game. One is respect. The other is presumption. And if you don't detect it instantly, it calcifies into permanence. So you start watching the details like a strategist. You pay attention to language, tone, reactions. When you're unavailable, do they understand or do they punish you with frustration? Do they accept your limits or do they pressure you to make exceptions? Do they thank you consistently or do they behave as if your help is owed? These are not little things. These are diagnostic signals. They reveal exactly where someone believes they stand in relation to you. And this is where most people fail. They ignore signals because they don't want to seem suspicious. They don't want to be that person. They want to remain agreeable. But agreeableness without standards is an open door. Machiavelli understood that people promise respect when they need something. But once the need is satisfied, promises become irrelevant. Patterns take over. So you stop taking words as proof. You start reading behavior as truth. Here's the metaphor. Entitlement is mold. It doesn't appear overnight. It grows quietly in the dark, feeding on moisture and moisture. In relationships is your unchallenged tolerance. Every time you let something slide, you water it. Eventually, it spreads everywhere. And then you don't have a friendship. You have contamination. So when you detect entitlement, you do something that feels unnatural at first. You treat resistance as data, not insult. When you set a boundary and someone responds with guilt, manipulation, passive aggression, or anger, that's information. That reaction is them revealing they believe access to you is their right. And here's the rule you must tattoo into your decisions. Resistance confirms necessity. People who respect you don't fight your limits. They adjust to them. People who feel entitled will battle every boundary because boundaries threaten their extraction. So let them resist. Don't argue. Don't defend. Don't debate. Hold structure. Because the moment you debate, you imply your boundary is negotiable. You imply your no can become yes with enough pressure. And once someone learns that, they will apply pressure forever. So you identify the entitlement shift immediately. Not later. Not after the resentment builds. Not after the damage is permanent. Because the longer entitlement exists unchallenged, the harder it becomes to reverse. And once it becomes permanent, the dynamic is already dead. You just haven't admitted it yet. There is one weapon people use when logic fails, and it works frighteningly well on those who don't see it coming. Guilt. Guilt is not communication. It is control disguised as morality. And once you recognize it, you'll never unsee it. Watch the pattern closely. When someone has a reasonable argument, they make it. When they don't, they make you feel wrong for saying no. They frame your boundary as selfishness. They rewrite your refusal as betrayal. They cast themselves as the wounded party, and you as the villain. Not because it's true, but because emotion is easier to weaponize than reason. Listen to the language. After everything I've done for you, I thought you cared. You've changed. You never used to be like this. None of these are arguments. They're emotional traps. They're designed to bypass your thinking and go straight for your discomfort. And if you give in once, you teach them exactly how to control you forever. Here's the brutal reality. The moment you reverse a decision because someone made you feel guilty, you've handed them the manual to your behavior. You've shown them that your boundaries are decorative, that logic doesn't matter, that all they need to do is apply enough emotional pressure and you'll fold. And they will use that knowledge relentlessly. Most people don't cave because they agree. They cave because they can't tolerate being seen as the bad one. They'd rather betray their own standards than sit with the tension of someone being disappointed. But that isn't kindness. That's cowardice wearing empathy as a costume. This is where cold-blooded clarity matters. You stop treating guilt as feedback. You treat it as manipulation until proven otherwise. Because people who respect your boundaries don't need to emotionally coerce you into abandoning them. So when guilt appears, you don't explain yourself emotionally. You don't argue. You don't over-justify. You respond with calm finality. I understand you're disappointed. My answer remains no. Then you stop talking. Your no is a complete sentence. Everything you add after it becomes material they can twist, reinterpret, or use against you. Silence is containment. It prevents escalation. It prevents negotiation. It prevents control. And yes, some people will escalate when guilt stops working. They'll raise their voice. They'll accuse you of not caring. They'll threaten to remove themselves from your life. Let them. Anyone who threatens to leave because you enforced a boundary was never invested in you. They were invested in access. The moment extraction stops, their interest evaporates. That tells you everything you need to know. Now let's destroy one of the most dangerous phrases ever normalized. Just this once. Just this once sounds reasonable, cooperative, flexible. But structurally, it's catastrophic. Every exception you allow becomes precedent. Every time you bend under pressure, you teach others that your rules aren't rules, they're suggestions. Here's how it always plays out. You set a boundary. Someone tests it. You hold firm. They push harder. They promise it won't happen again. They make it sound like this single exception is the difference between you being understanding or unreasonable. And if you cave, you lose. Not because of what you allowed this time, but because of what you've communicated about every future interaction. You've revealed your breaking point. You've proven persistence works. You've shown that pressure defeats structure. One crack in a foundation doesn't seem serious, but it spreads. And eventually, the entire structure collapses. So you treat exceptions like structural damage. This doesn't mean you can never adjust your boundaries. It means you never adjust them while someone is actively pressuring you. Adjustments come from clarity, not coercion. Decisions made under pressure aren't decisions, they're surrenders. When someone says just this once, your answer is no, not even this once. When they promise it won't happen again, your response is, then you'll understand why I can't make the exception. When they accuse you of being inflexible, you don't soften it. You say, yes, I am, deliberately. No apology, no explanation, no justification. Consistency is authority. People who respect structure adapt to it. People who don't will expose themselves trying to break it. Either way, you win. Now understand this distinction deeply. Being cold-blooded is not being cruel. Cruelty seeks to harm. Cold-blooded discipline seeks to protect. You don't stop caring. You stop letting care override strategy. You maintain awareness without hostility. You observe without reacting. You don't need to call people out. You don't need to announce what they did wrong. You adjust access and let reality deliver the message. This is where most people fail. Emotional control. Someone disrespects them, and they react instantly. Anger, defensiveness, explanations. And in that reaction, they surrender control. They show exactly where they can be touched. Once someone knows how to affect you, they know how to manipulate you. So you stay measured. If someone provokes you, you don't give them the reaction they're fishing for. You respond with calm clarity, or not at all. Your lack of reaction becomes the signal. You remove predictability by limiting emotional access. Think of your emotions like nuclear codes. You don't hand them to everyone who asks. You reserve them for those who've proven they won't misuse them. This doesn't make you robotic. It makes you selective. Cruel people harm for pleasure. Cold-blooded people simply refuse to be harmed. You are not cutting people off out of malice. You are removing access from those who have demonstrated they cannot handle it responsibly. That's not punishment. That's self-preservation. Most will misunderstand this. They'll call you cold, distant, changed. Let them. Their interpretation is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to protect your peace. And if that requires you to be less emotionally available to people who abused your availability, so be it. Power doesn't live in heartlessness. It lives in discipline. And discipline is the difference between being consumed and being sovereign. Silence is the most misunderstood weapon you possess. Most people treat silence as weakness, as avoidance, as something to apologize for. They rush to fill it because emptiness makes them uncomfortable. But silence, when deliberate, is not emptiness. It is pressure, and pressure exposes truth. When you stop explaining yourself, something interesting happens. People are forced to sit alone with their own interpretations. When you stop correcting assumptions, they're forced to confront their own behavior. When you stop filling the space with words, the space itself becomes the message. This is why silence is feared. It gives nothing to argue with, nothing to twist, nothing to weaponize. Every time you explain yourself to someone who doesn't respect you, you hand them information. You show them what arguments work on you. You reveal which justifications make you doubt yourself. You teach them how to negotiate with your boundaries. Silence shuts that door completely. Let people misunderstand you. Their interpretations are not your responsibility. In fact, they're diagnostic. If someone assumes your silence is punishment, that tells you they know they crossed a line. If they assume your silence is indifference, that tells you they never valued your presence in the first place. Either way, silence reveals more than explanation ever could. This is silence as containment, not escape. You're not avoiding conflict. You're removing negotiation. You're holding a boundary without debate. Most people talk themselves out of power because they're afraid of how silence looks. But strategic silence doesn't weaken your position. It fortifies it. When you withdraw after disrespect, you create a vacuum. And vacuums demand to be filled. Most people fill that space with anxiety. They start replaying interactions. They start questioning their behavior. They reach out trying to restore equilibrium. They apologize for things you never accused them of. They promise changes you never requested. They expose themselves completely, all because you refuse to explain. That's the leverage silence creates. And this is crucial. You must not use silence as passive aggression. That's emotional leakage. Silence must be clean, neutral, unreactive. Not sulking, not dramatic. Just absence of access. Silence is not revenge. It's containment. Now let's dismantle another illusion that keeps people powerless. Warnings. Most people live their lives issuing threats they never enforce. If you do that again, I'm done. Next time, I won't tolerate it. I mean it this time. And then it happens again, and nothing changes. This is why no one takes their boundaries seriously. Because they've proven those boundaries are verbal decorations, not structural rules. So, you stop warning. You stop announcing what you're going to do. You stop explaining consequences in advance. You replace conditions with consequences. Conditions invite negotiation. Consequences end discussion. When someone disrespects you, you don't say, "If you do that again, I'll pull back." You pull back. When someone exploits your generosity, you don't warn them that you'll stop giving. You stop. When someone violates your trust, you don't threaten distance. You create it. Let your actions deliver the message your words never could. Consequences don't argue. They don't justify. They don't debate fairness. They simply occur. And the person experiencing them has to figure out why on their own. That's what makes them effective. This feels harsh to people who are addicted to giving chances. But here's the truth. Most won't admit. People don't change because of what you say. They change because of what happens. When there are no consequences for disrespect, there is no incentive to stop. So, you make your boundaries self-executing. Disrespect automatically reduces access. Violation automatically triggers distance. No announcement, no drama, no emotional charge. Structure replaces reaction. Now comes the internal shift that turns pain into power. Disrespect hurts. Anyone telling you otherwise is lying. But pain is only wasted if you personalize it. When someone treats you poorly, most people turn inward. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? That's the wrong question. Disrespect is not a verdict on your worth. It's data about their character. It's intelligence about how they behave when they believe there are no consequences. And intelligence is valuable if you use it. So instead of reacting emotionally, you extract information. What did this reveal about how they see the dynamic? What does it tell you about their values, their limits, their respect for you? Then you adjust access accordingly. No confrontation, no speeches, no need for them to understand, just accuracy. When you stop taking disrespect personally and start treating it strategically, You stop being a victim of other people's behavior and become the architect of your own environment. Pain becomes refinement. Violation becomes information. And every adjustment you make sharpens your structure until only those who respect it can remain. This is not revenge. This is precision. Everything converges here. All power, all peace, all control distills into one principle: structure over emotion, system over impulse, discipline over reaction. Living cold-blooded is not about feeling nothing. It's about refusing to let feelings decide who gets access to you. Most people make decisions about others based on memory, guilt, hope, or nostalgia. They let history override reality. They grant access because someone used to matter, not because they currently behave with respect. That's how decay enters your life quietly. Structure ends that. You stop asking, "How do I feel about them?" You start asking, "What have they consistently shown me?" Access is no longer permanent. It is conditional and renewable. This is where many people break, because they confuse forgiveness with access. Forgiveness is internal. Access is structural. You can forgive someone and still keep the door closed. Forgiveness without reform is not mercy. It is permission to repeat the offense. So you require requalification. Just because someone once had full access to you does not mean they keep it forever. If they abused it, time alone doesn't restore it. Apologies don't restore it. History doesn't restore it. Only sustained behavioral change restores it. Words mean nothing here. Patterns mean everything. If someone disrespects you, apologizes, behaves well briefly, then slides back into old behavior, that is not growth, that is rehearsal. And unless you break the pattern, it will repeat indefinitely. So you demand evidence, not promises. Time, not talk. Consistency, not emotion. And if they can't provide that, they don't get access, period. This is where peace becomes strategic. Most people think peace is the absence of conflict, when everyone is happy, agreeable, calm. That's not peace. That's temporary quiet. Real peace is structural. It's built, it's protected, it's enforced. Peace is what exists when you've removed manipulators, entitlement, and emotional parasites from your life. Peace is what remains when your boundaries are automatic and your standards are non-negotiable. Your peace is not fragile. It is valuable, and anything valuable must be protected. Without peace, you cannot think clearly. Without clarity, you cannot decide accurately. Without accurate decisions, you cannot build anything meaningful. Anyone who threatens your peace through disrespect, manipulation, guilt, or exploitation must lose access immediately. Not eventually. Not after one more chance. Immediately. This is not cruelty. This is self-command. Living structurally cold-blooded means you stop making excuses for people who would never make excuses for you. You stop giving chances to people who have proven they waste them. You stop prioritizing connection with those who consistently violate your standards. Structure is not cold. It is honest. It is the architecture that keeps exploitation out and respect in. When you live this way, something profound happens. Your life begins to self-filter. Draining people leave on their own. Manipulators lose interest. Those who thrive on chaos find you unreachable. And the ones who remain, they rise to your level. You stop attracting people who need you to be weak. You start attracting people who respect strength. You stop explaining. You start enforcing. You stop negotiating your worth. You require it. This is the Machiavellian shift most people never make. Power isn't about dominating others. It's about refusing to be dominated. It's about designing your life so manipulation cannot penetrate it. It's about being so structurally sound that disrespect has nowhere to land. Cold-blooded control is not the absence of heart. It is the protection of it. You still care, but selectively, deeply, but wisely. You reserve your humanity for those who protect it, not those who weaponize it. This is how you move from begging to commanding, from exposure to containment, from emotional servitude to sovereignty. Stop begging through availability. Stop begging through explanations. Stop begging through tolerance of repeated violations. Because every time you beg, you remove the fear of losing you. And without that fear, respect dies. Contain access. Make your presence something that must be earned and maintained. Let uncertainty re-enter the dynamic when boundaries are crossed. Enforce structure without announcement. Withdraw without explanation. Let silence and consequence teach what words never could. This is not bitterness. This is not isolation. This is discipline. And discipline is freedom. The moment you stop begging is the moment everything transforms. The moment you enforce structure is the moment respect appears. The moment you become unreadable is the moment you reclaim control. Not over others, over yourself. That is cold-blooded power. That is Machiavellian discipline. And once you live this way, you don't need to demand respect. Your structure does it for you.